We are in the home stretch of finishing our Theology 101 series. We are going to be talking about eschatology. I'm here with Josh. I'm Ben. I'm the lead pastor here at Life Fellowship Church. Josh, our producer. Dan is out gallivanting around North Carolina somewhere, doesn't care about us.
He heard that we were talking about eschatology and decided that he's
exactly what
he's not available. He's got some appointment.
He does. You know, Dan, he doesn't like to talk about anything controversial.
Never.
That's so Dan.
Never.
By the way, every once in a while I get these thoughts in my head that just questions that I want to answer. I want to ask you or ask other people. Yeah. And I know this has nothing to do with theology, maybe a little bit. What's your drink at Starbucks?
Oh, I have an answer to this.
If you go to Starbucks, what is your drink?
Okay, so it's a pretty girly drink. So just first of all, I'm not the cool, manly black coffee.
You're a frou-frou guy.
Yeah. So I get a black and white mocha, which means half and half. So it's half pumps mocha, half pumps white mocha.
Oh, okay.
Because that combination just makes it so good. White mocha's too sweet. Mocha's a little too bitter. Put them both together, it's wonderful.
Wow.
I get it extra hot because I like it.
I've noticed that you have to really get it extra hot because Starbucks is like, you get it and you're like, I've got 2 minutes to drink this coffee.
Yep. It's $160 if you don't. It's $180 if you order it extra hot. And so it lasts
Wait.
longer.
They charge you 20 cents?
No. 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm just like, I was thinking...
So it's 20 more degrees warmer, and I like it.
But
that
that's
way.
heavenly.
It lasts longer.
180 is perfect.
So, and I'm decaf now. That's a pretty recent thing, but I finally found out that caffeine affects my anxiety, and so now it just it's just a nice warm drink.
It's amazing how we have, as a culture, just completely thought there's nothing wrong with caffeine, but as a stimulant and an addictive. But there's other things that we're like, oh, that's horrible.
Right,
you know?
right. I mean, it'll be interesting to see where we're at. Like, what about you? What's your drink?
So I'm pretty bland when it comes to, I cannot do the frou-frou drinks. I feel like if I wanted a milkshake, I would go to...
It's not a frappuccino.
I would go to some... I know, but like, I want there to be a tinge of sweetness, but I don't want there to be... I want to taste the coffee.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I used to get really Americanos just because I was cheap, and I'm like, I love espresso more than I love coffee. That's just
espresso and water, everybody.
Yeah, just espresso. Yeah, sorry. And so I would typically get an Americano with heated up oat milk and a packet of stevia and a squirt of honey. I know that sounds
this really shows how different you and I are.
But listen, I got a drink at Starbucks last week that was so good.
Yeah?
And I just pulled it out of...
What was it?
Out of left field. It was their decaf medium roast pour over.
Oh.
If you get a pour over, it is really good. Anyways, I've discovered the beauties of pour overs. Nice. So anyways, that has nothing to do with of course, some people are going to be like, how dare you shop at Starbucks?
I know. I actually have gotten this before from pro-lifers. How dare you shop at Starbucks? It's my favorite coffee. Whatever.
Yeah. Anyways, I just was curious on what your drink is. So, all right. Eschatology, which is the study of last things, final things. And so this is really when we get into, Josh, there are certain things about eschatology that I don't believe are that controversial, that most people would say, I agree about that. For example, almost everyone believes within Orthodox evangelical Christianity that Jesus is going to return.
Yes.
Got that covered.
Yes.
How and when he comes back, we'll spend an episode purely on that issue.
Like, what does that phrase mean?
Yeah.
Is the question.
There's all kinds of, there's 4 different schools of thought on that. And then the last part is really, the final state of eternity, right? It's not just about Jesus' return. It's about last things is ultimately about heaven and hell or lake of fire or new heaven, new earth. Things that we read about towards the end of the narrative in the scriptures. So we'll be dealing with those 3 big topics, and if it takes us 3 episodes, praise God. If not, we'll just figure it out because
we'll see what happens.
We always do. So I thought today we would just talk about the fact that Jesus will return. And one of the things that the Bible's very clear about is that Jesus will return suddenly. That that nobody knows when that will happen.
Yep.
So
angels.
Yeah. So Matthew 24 verse 44, James chapter 5 verse 8, Revelation 2 verse 22. There's this idea that no one knows the time or the hour in which Jesus will return. And then we also believe that Jesus will return visibly. This is the idea that, for example, years ago, when liberal Christianity was really kind of coming on the scene, late 1800s, when the anti-supernatural beliefs were starting to take shape and influence Christian thought, a lot of times people will believe, well, when Jesus said he'll return, because anti-supernaturals can't have anything supernatural happen, Jesus was simply talking about the spirit of Jesus returning. Like there would be this spirit of the Messiah that would overcome the world, where goodness and peace and harmony
Wouldn't that be a supernatural thing?
Well, yes, but what they're saying is there's more of a ethereal, kind of a mystical, spiritual unity of humanity, as opposed to Jesus really coming back visibly.
Yeah.
1 John chapter 3 verse 2, Revelation 1 verse 7, and then finally, he's coming back bodily. He's coming back in a visible form, or not just visible, but also physical form. So we know this in Acts chapter 1 when Jesus is ascending. In the beginning of Acts, we see the angels showing up and saying, hey, the same way that he went up, you will see him come back down again. So 1 Thessalonians 4:16 is another passage that talks about that. So suddenly, visibly, bodily, that's really important. I think everyone within the Orthodox Christian family would say, we believe that.
Yeah.
So there's no debate on that.
Yeah.
So what we mostly disagree upon are the details of when and how that happens.
Yeah.
We'll get into that later. What I do want to get into is the signs that precede Christ's return, because I think that's really important to understand. And here's really the crux of the issue when it comes to these things.
Yeah.
Because if Jesus can come back at any time, and everyone believes that, Jesus actually gives some things that are going to happen to precede his return. And so some people believe, are these signs that have happened already, or are these signs going to happen in the future? So I'm going to go through the 6 signs that either Jesus or Paul talk about happening. Now, a lot of these Jesus talked about in the three chapters. If you want to write this down, the 3 chapters that if you want to read over and study that talk a lot about these signs preceding Jesus' return, Matthew chapter 24, Luke chapter 21, and Mark chapter 13. Those are all chapters that really encompass a lot of what Jesus talks about. And there's 4 main points that Jesus makes in these 3 chapters. They're parallel passages, the Synoptic Gospels. So the first one is that the preaching of the gospel will reach to all the nations. That's significant. The reality that the good news of Jesus will extend to the 4 corners of the earth, and every ethnos will hear it. And that's even, we see that in Revelation chapter 5, where around the throne room of God is every people, every tribe, every tongue, every nation. And so there's this idea that there will be people from all nations, right? So I see your eyes.
Wait. Okay. So I want to make sure, because first I was thinking, so obviously I think with nations is not as literal in the way that we use it now.
It's Greek ethnos.
Right. It's just like, it's everything, right?
Everything.
And so then I guess maybe a question for me would be, because I'm wanting to know, like, what about those tribes in the really, really tiny islands and things like that? Because when I've thought of like the every knee will bow, every tongue will confess
Jesus is Lord,
that makes me think of like that's what's happening during the he's coming down and everyone has to bow down kind of a thing, as opposed to before.
Yeah.
And so help me understand, like, does this mean that the return couldn't come until every island full of people have had some kind of a chance to hear something?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's up for debate. All right, so there are some people that believe not all the time when all is used, it means all in Scripture. Now, I know I'm just open up a giant can of worms by saying that. Many times that they will use euphemistic language, right? So for example, I know there's this passage in Acts where it says, someone is saying, everyone in all of Asia has heard about Jesus.
Right.
Okay. That statement is not to be interpreted literally.
Yeah.
That statement is to be meant as someone's making a euphemistic statement like, this message is everywhere now.
Yeah. It's how we would now be like, it got literally everywhere. Out there.
Right. So all of us use kinds of euphemistic language. Yeah. So some people are saying, well, no, this literally means all ethnos. So there are still people groups that have yet to hear about Jesus, and so Jesus will not return until every nation hears. Some people feel like this is more of a symbolic statement when he's like, basically, the gospel will reach all kind of geographical areas, and we can definitely state that we know that the gospel has gone forth. It's in Asia, it's in Europe, Africa, South America. I mean, everywhere where there is a populous group of people, there's the gospel. Okay, we still know that there are people that have yet to hear, but then
that would be taking it literally, which seems like generally probably the way that I think about hermeneutics at this point in my life is I probably don't usually take words like that super literally. And so it seems like if that's going to be the case in a lot of, like, if that's how I'm thinking about a bunch of other cases, then it seems like weird for me to be like, well, when it comes to eschatology, I'm going to be like, no, that means literally every single knee.
See, you're so smart, Josh, because this is literally what Christians have been debating for hundreds of years.
Well, then we're not going to figure it out today.
I mean,
but I'm interested.
What you're saying is, and this is where a lot of times the dispensationalists come up against covenant theologians to say, no, not every prophecy is meant to be interpreted in this literal, like 144,000. Like there's literally 144,000 people that accept Jesus from all these 12 tribes. That these are numbers that are symbolic in nature. So again, I don't want to get into weeds of that right now, but there are some people that say, okay, so if Jesus says, I can return at any moment. Right. And Jesus also said, hey, the gospel's got to be preached to all the nations, then it's kind of like, oh, we got time, right? I mean, because there's still people groups that have yet to hear about Jesus. Right. So that's what I'm saying. There's some interpretation to some of these statements that cause people to pause and say, well, wait a second. Right. Is his return really imminent? Yeah. So anyways, but that's one of the signs that Christ said will happen before he returns. The second one is the Great Tribulation. We know that there's going to be an intense time of persecution, a time of and again, whether this is a literal 7 years that dispensational premillennialists believe in, or there's a time period by which there's just an extra amount of persecution to the people of God.
But Ben, Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye taught me that we're not going to have to worry about that.
I know.
Unless we're like a bad Christian pilot guy who's not quite there yet. Unless you're that guy. Yeah. Like, we don't have to worry about it. Tribulation comes after Jesus comes back.
Exactly. Yeah. No, well, again, up for debate. So the Great Tribulation, that has to precede Christ's return. The third one is there will be false prophets in them doing signs and wonders. Mark 13 talks about this, that there's going to be a rise of false prophets and people that will do signs and wonders to try to deceive people into believing in them. There will also be signs in heaven. Jesus talks about there being cosmological signs.
Really?
Yes, there's going to be things. I mean, we see this in Revelation. We also see this. Jesus talks about this in Matthew and also in Mark. There being signs in heavens, earthquakes, famines. There's going to be some supernatural natural events that occur that Jesus calls the birth pangs before the end. So we know there's going to be some kind of manifestation in the physical realm that will foretell the coming of Jesus. Yeah. And then there's in addition to the false prophets, there will be an antichrist, a man of rebellion. We see this in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Paul talks about this a lot. And again, this this idea of the rise of an antichrist really parallels a lot of what we learn about in Daniel, where there's this little horn that becomes this beast and deceives the world. And so we whether or not there's an antichrist that comes during the tribulation, or there are going to, for example, some people believe that Hitler was that the antichrist is always coming generationally. There's always an antichrist.
Yeah.
So therefore, whether it's Julius Caesar or whether it's or a pope, there's all kinds of different ideas of who the antichrist might be. And then Paul talks about this in Romans 11, that salvation of Israel, that there's going to be a time for the Gentiles, but that at some point, as the Gentiles have been grafted into the branch of Christ, there's going to be a restoration at some point of the people of Israel again. So all of those things. So again, here's the big debate, and we're going to pause right here. That's not working. I need to know how much time is left.
What? It's not been working this whole time?
Yeah, that's okay. I just need to know how much time I've got left.
We're at roughly probably 15 minutes in. So
okay, so 5 more minutes.
Something like
Perfect.
that, or
okay.
7.
Okay. So here's the big problem, Josh.
Okay.
And that is, again, comes up to some hermeneutical differences. Mm-hmm. These signs have either already happened. There's a group of Christians that would say, yes, the Great Tribulation that happened in 70 AD. Okay, they're going to say these, and there's been periods of Great Tribulation.
Right.
They're going to say the preaching of the gospel to all the nations has already happened. Mm-hmm. Right. There has been you see the pattern of Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth, the pattern of the book of Acts showing how the gospel is spreading to the nations. And so what they're saying is, oh yeah, that's already happened. We can always say that, yeah, there's always an antichrist that seems to be coming up every generation or so, of people that drawing people away from God, doing horrible, wicked things. Yep. So there are certain people that would say, yeah, these are things that have already been fulfilled. Right. Therefore, we believe that the imminent return of Jesus is possible.
Right.
Or there's people that say, no, none of these have taken place in the fullness, literalness of what Jesus meant. Therefore, there has to be, these are going to most likely take place in a future period of time. Now, dispensationalists believe that will happen in all of these things will take place in a 7-year period. Okay, called the Great Tribulation.
Right.
So again, these are things that are up for debate, but I think at the end of the day, Christians can agree that the return of Jesus is imminent. How they define imminent, though, is different for everyone.
Right. Okay, so I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
What are Christian numerologists getting wrong? Like, they're paying all this attention to the signs and more than anybody else, I feel like.
Yeah. Jack Van Impe.
How many times now has someone been like, here is the date that everything's going to happen, and then pretty soon it's like, oh, actually, it's in several months from now. I missed one verse.
Okay, so basically, it's a massive perversion of an interpretation of something Jesus said. Jesus said, no man will know and I don't know the specific verse reference, but no man will know the hour in which I come.
Yeah.
And so what people will say to pervert that will say, well, we don't know the hour, but we can know the year.
How do you get that?
But that's what they're doing. What they're doing is playing with the semantics of the wording, as opposed to saying, no, what Jesus meant by the hour. If you look at how he uses that word throughout his entire ministry, he's talking about a period of time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just messed up. The way people interpret scriptures.
Yeah.
I do think that anyone who tries to say there's a date, I know it's coming, I've done all the research. For example, I think if Dan was here, I know we've mentioned this book before, but there's a guy that wrote a book almost 35 years ago, 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Returning in 1988. Sold millions and millions of copies. Millions. People ate it up. People sold their homes, sold their businesses, and then 1988 happened, and
it didn't have the longest shelf life.
It did not have a long shelf life. And then he said, "Oh, I got it wrong. I did one miscalculation. It's 89 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1989."
Did he do another book?
Yes.
No.
And people still bought it.
Oh man.
So it's it's mind-boggling when Jesus said, no one's going to know the hour. Why do we still think that we can know the hour? Yeah. There's been so many groups.
Yeah.
For example, even the roots of the Seventh-day Adventists followed someone who taught that Jesus was coming back. Ellen G. White had her followers sold all their goods, dressed in white robes, climbed the top of a mountain, and just waited, and nothing happened. But in the rest of those people kind of developed into the Seventh-day Advent. I mean, it's really interesting, some of the roots. But anytime you have anyone showing up and saying, Jesus is definitely returning at this period, at this time, come follow me, sell your stuff, run the other way.
Yeah.
Run the other. I do think that there are people that look at what's happening in every generation and say, "Oh, it can't get any worse."
Right. Yeah. Or there's a lot of that.
It's gotta happen soon because of look at all these signs, and so it's been 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And we still don't know. And it could be still another 2,000 years.
Yeah. So I guess maybe my final question has to do with application. You know, you said at the beginning, like, it's important for us to know these 6 signs.
Yeah.
But then it's really clear, or mostly clear, what we should not do with that. So what should we be doing with these? Like, if we don't even know how to interpret some of these signs, like, I'm like, are the signs and wonders thing that the false prophets are doing, is that even literal?
I think, what Jesus is saying is don't be duped. Don't be duped by people that are going to come along and say something. Okay, I think that's one application.
There is a lot of deception stuff.
There's a lot of deception stuff. Think again, what does he point out? The false prophets, the Antichrist. There's going to be things that people say and do that make you feel like following them and saying, oh, this guy's got the message.
Yeah.
Don't be deceived. That's the first one. The second one is there's a missional component to Christ's return saying, I'm going to return. I want you to be active.
Yeah.
I don't want you to just wait around and just be lazy. I mean, that's actually one of the main reasons why the letters of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians was written. Paul was writing to this church that heard about the return of Christ and said, there's no need to work. There's no need to do any, like, let's just wait, or let's just sit around, play our video games, and Jesus is going to return. Almost like a eschatological fatalism.
Right.
That they had adopted.
Although arguably they even had more evidence that this was like happening like soon, like really soon. Like it was kind of understandable for them to be like, in the next like 40, 50 years.
So Paul in some ways is like, no, you've got a life to live. There's a mission that Jesus has left you with. Even the apostles, I believe that the 11 disciples that were left really believed they would see the return of Jesus.
Yes.
And every generation since then has believed it's going to happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
So I think there's a missional component. I think there's a deception component. I also think that there's also just an awareness. Don't get lazy with what is happening. You know, don't fall asleep.
Yeah.
Be alert. Be aware of the sign of the times. And not that means it's definitely going to happen, but it could. And so you just always have to be ready and alert. I just think that's part of Jesus' message, and there's a good thing about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember as I remember as a young adult, the first time my parents left me and my older brother home alone. I'm talking of like for overnight.
How old were you?
I think my brother was 18 and I was 16.
Okay, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So we were older.
Yeah.
We didn't.
You were fine.
We were fine. We were okay. But there was something about we didn't really clean up, but we knew that there was a time when my parents were going to show up, and the 2 hours before they showed up was like, we got to clean this place.
Right.
I don't think Jesus wants us to live like that. I think Jesus doesn't want us to just kind of just live your life the way you want to. And oh man, I should probably care about how I live right now because my parents are coming home soon. I think it's living with the intention of it could happen at any moment. So live like that. Live with that kind of intentionality.
It's like when you're making stuff in the kitchen and you're doing it right, where you're putting stuff away as you go.
Yes.
Like you're finding those opportunities. Like clean up little messes in your life as you go. Don't just wait for the end.
Don't just do your own thing and say, oh, now I've got to live like my parents are showing up.
Right.
That's not the way to live a Christian life. Anyways.
That's helpful.
Jesus will return. So next time we will dig into the whole idea of the millennium. the views of the eschatological timeline, how that looks.
Jesus will return, and apparently it can always get worse. It's like the other historical lesson from this. It can get worse.
You're right. It can get worse, believe it or not. So, all right. I hope this has been an enjoyable conversation for you. Again, these are all things. Don't get caught up in the minutia. Don't get caught up emotionally in these things. Just know that Jesus will return in the right time, in the right way, to give himself the most glory. And I hope this has been a challenging, enlightening episode for you. Thanks again for joining us on Life Talks. We'll talk to you next time.